What's good, folks? Welcome to another edition of the Cover One Film Room, the show that gives you the hows and the whys behind both the good and the bad of the Buffalo Bills. I'm one of your two hosts, Anthony Prohaska, joined as always by Erik Turner and Erik. We're in off-season mode.
Yeah.
The 2024/2025 season is over. The Buffalo Bills were unceremoniously bounced by the Kansas City Chiefs. And rather than dive into a multitude of pieces with that, we're starting to shift a little bit into off-season mode. But before we kind of lay out that and some things that we're getting into this off-season for the film room, how you feeling? How's it going? How was your vacation?
Vacation was good. It stinks to be back in the Northeast. I'll tell you that, being down in South Florida for about a week or so with the family. But it was a great time to take a vacation. It was the first day of vacation was basically the end of the Chiefs game. So thank goodness for that, because I didn't want to have to wallow in my sorrows for too long. I got to go right to the beach afterwards.
What was it like watching like the playoff game because you went to a public spot, right?
No, we ended up not going there just because the kids were shot from flying down and everything. So yeah, we laid low at the Airbnb, watched it on the back patio. Kids were in the pool. Very relaxing, but stressful. Start to a trip, but again, the next day was busted out the film early and then just went to the beach and just unwind for a good week or so. But yeah, it's tough to be back now in this weather. But it is exciting. It's a turn the page type episode for us. So I'm excited to start talking off season and really, knocking down a lot of these, stuff on the calendar when it comes to the NFL. And so, we're going to start with that tonight and, take a look at some of the free agents for the Bills. But we're going to take some, look at those things, whether it's Mack, Hollins, Ty Johnson, Amari Cooper, Rasul Douglas, and some other names. We're going to take a look at a bunch of those guys, show you what they did for the Bills this year, their usage and all that good stuff as we typically do. And then, of course, whether we believe or they, whether the Bills will re-sign them, at the beginning of this offseason.
Yeah, I echo your sentiments when it comes to the offseason work. It's obviously the in-season stuff is great, but I love offseason time. I love free agent talk. We love draft talk here and the scouting piece, the evaluation piece, the fits, all of it. So it's nice to kind of start to turn the page into that segment of the show and the season and the schedule. And also within that kind of, not necessarily turning the page, but opening up potential, some new pages for us here in the film room. Obviously this is a film-based show, but we will be tweaking our format a bit to bring you the Cover One Film Room in a way that works for both our YouTube viewers and also our podcast listeners. Nothing will change as far as the deep dives, the film study, the scheme breakdowns. Those are here to stay. We're just kind of trying to give a bit more of a podcast-friendly audio only touch to this show. So you're still going to get that in-depth analysis. We'll also have some further breakdowns on Discord and for our insiders and things like that, which is obviously a huge focus for us. And all those added elements, which we're excited to bring you folks to kind of make ourselves more readily available on the multitude of platforms that we operate on.
Yeah, it's a new year, and at Cover One, all of us are trying to do different things to adapt, to grow. And one area we wanted to focus on is the audio side, because we've always been a visual-based, X's and O's, in-depth scheme type breakdown show where we show you a lot of video, a lot of visual stuff for YouTube, and that didn't always translate well for our subscribers and people that wanted to listen to it and don't have the time to watch it and be in depth and be zoned in like we are for the hour and a half every week. So we wanted to kind of change the format and delivery a little bit. We're going to do a lot of different things when it comes to video breakdowns. In our Discord too, we have a film channel. We always talk about our insiders helping us with topics and things they want us to discuss, but they also love watching the film and learning from the film. So we're not going to get too far away from that, but a lot of that type of stuff is going to go down in the Discord. It's going to go down sometimes on social media. On Mondays, I always do a video on myself. You always do some type of X's and O's breakdown during the week. So back to in-season stuff next year. That's what we're going to kind of do, kind of augment the film room in that way. We're still going to have film on here. We're just not going to hang on to each play for 3 to 5 minutes and get into the nuts and bolts as deep and as long as we did. But we just want to grow, you guys. All right. And I know you guys understand. A lot of our insiders and our supporters have said, hey, it'd be nice to have an audio element. I have an hour ride in. I'd love to listen to you guys. I can't watch it, obviously, while I'm driving into work.
So don't do that. Not safe.
No, please don't. Please don't. And so we're trying to grow a little bit and change some things a little bit so that we can encompass everyone, because, you know, we're going to be doing this for many years, and we want to continue to grow, continue to expand our subscriber base. And, you know, we want people to learn from us, not just on the video sense on YouTube, but also in the audio world as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That growth mindset. We kind of take that focus in all seriousness every offseason, kind of retool, all jokes aside, self-scout and evaluate and kind of go forward. Everything always comes back to football and how we approach it from an X's and O's standpoint. But yeah, that's the focus. And real appreciate this comment that came through. It said, Anthony and Erik, you truly do great work. Love your shows. Go Bills. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for that feedback. And I want to use that as kind of a jumping off piece into, obviously we get lots of feedback from our insiders and that type of communication. But if you watch this show regularly or the brand regularly, any of the shows, get at us on social, on Twitter, in the YouTube comments, whatever have you. Like, we truly and sincerely welcome any and every all kinds of feedback. Let us know what works for you, like how you consume the episodes visually, audio wise. Do you watch it in one sitting? Do you watch it in pieces? Like, we want to bring the content to you folks with the detail and depth that we do, and we want to make it as consumable and as user friendly or listener or viewer friendly as possible. And again, that's where a lot of this stems from and comes from. Obviously a heavy piece from our insiders. So if you are that, thank you very much for that. If you're not, you should become an insider, because it's even better than just kind of doing this now. But even without that, yeah, any and all feedback is welcome as we continue to try and better ourselves, better the show, better the brand, all of that. So thank you folks for riding with us. And Erik, let's start to turn that page a little bit into this off season, and we kick it off with this episode focus talking about the Bills' upcoming free agents this offseason. We want to highlight several guys, large scale, small scale, performance, roles, potential future on the team, and a multitude of other aspects as well.
Yeah, and, you know, we talked about some of the players at the top, and so we're going to go down most of this list today, really hammer home some of the bigger names near the top of this list when we're talking unrestricted free agents. Guys like Amari Cooper, Rasul Douglas, Austin Johnson, Mack Hollins, Smoot, Gilliam, Ty Johnson. Like, there's a long list of names. Again, we're going to try to focus on a few of them and get into some of the nitty gritty on some of those players. And we're going to start off with Amari Cooper and Anthony. It was a guy that when the Bills got him, we were super excited. Why? Because we believe that the Bills needed some kind of threat on the outside, someone outside the numbers, someone that is that on the backside of a 3-by-1 set, you're having Cooper by himself, able to run the entire route tree. Now, the reviews on him were mixed. I know he was a little, injured throughout the year. His production was, compared to who his name is and what he's been his entire career, the production was down. But under the umbrella of everyone eats, and obviously you can't fight that, because that mantra, worked to a T, and the Bills offense was fantastic. And we're going to show you some stats when we're talking splits when Cooper was on versus off. But overall, I know the production wasn't there, but when you look at the numbers, when you look at some of the film and how he impacted games at times, you can see that there were it was different on the defensive side and how teams defended the Bills offense when Cooper was on the field.
Yeah. And even, just from a stats point, it might not blow people away, but he was still sitting there with a 0.29 EPA per target, which is pretty successful for this squad. And I think a lot of his usage, I still wonder how much, when he got banged up, how much did that linger? How much did that throw him off a little bit? Like some of those little variables, because it looked like he was starting to become more and more acclimated, used, and then we saw a taper wane a little bit. But overall, I think I was relatively pleased with his time with the Bills, but a lot of that came back to, not to kind of pat ourselves on the back for it, but I thought a lot of his production was tied to the things we broke down when we talked about his signing. And I think a lot of people who were frustrated with him or his production looked at the 2023 highlights and thought that's the Amari Cooper that was coming to Buffalo. And as we broke down a lot of his 2024 stuff, there wasn't that same level of juice. There wasn't that same level of burst and explosion and explosivity to his game. What he brought from a true X or archetype standpoint in that regard, formationally and schematically applied, and his releases were there. But I think for a lot of people, they looked at him as a true one. And a lot of that came from what they were seeing or gleaning from 2023. And that wasn't really who he was in 2024, even before he came to the Bills.
Yeah, at 12.5% team target percentage, 1.82 yards per route run, which is 38th among wide receivers with at least 40 targets. He had right around 40 targets, 26 receptions, 338 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Only had 2 drops. That's 5%. Usually, like, we expected a little more when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But as you can see, there are a couple of things that really stood out to me when I looked at the stats, aside from the film. We'll talk more about the film stuff in a second. But what I have on the screen is courtesy of True Media. And when I looked at the downs, for his time in Buffalo and how often or not he was really targeted, it was interesting to see that a lot of those targets came on early downs and not on those, crucial downs. Like
the
in
high
the
leverage
Chiefs game,
situations, the
high
money
leverage.
downs. Yeah.
In the Chiefs game, I loved what they did with him because they were looking, when Josh was throwing hot, they were looking to him, on third downs. He had that one against McDuffie to the bottom of the screen on the left side of the offense where he's running an in-breaker on a slant. That was very nice on third down. There was the one where he's in the slot and Josh was throwing hot with that blitz and he hit him for the first down.
Yeah, it's a little back shoulder kind of on the slant. Cooper pinned it, was nice.
Right. And so I was kind of bummed to see that on third downs, he only had 4 receptions. And you think about it, including the playoffs, that 2 of those came in the Chiefs.
Chiefs, yeah.
So if you look at some of the targets, first and second down, 17 targets, 15 targets on second down. And so then only 8 targets for his entire stay in Buffalo on third down. And so for a guy that we wanted to be not an alpha wide receiver, but a guy that would get Josh the easy bucket, whether it's with separation, with route running, I didn't think they incorporated him enough on those high leverage situations. He had some big plays on the field. There's no doubt about it. But I just thought they would have incorporated it, or at least called some package plays, even if he didn't know the entire offense, a little more often in those high leverage moments.
Yeah. And, especially with some of the flashes we saw, I mean, that touchdown catch, the 20 plus air yard touchdown catch against the Jets, like that's just a hell of a grab by him. And we saw some of the flashes that even though the juice wasn't there, he was somebody that you thought they could lean on a bit more. And I think that's like kind of one of the biggest focuses for me. Like, how much of it was Cooper? How much of it was just kind of the incorporation to the offense, or Brady or Allen looking elsewhere, and kind of that factor in that piece. And then you've got a nice pull up here again from True Media, the targets by quarter, which I think are really, really interesting when you look at how it started, finished, and then how the second and third look from a reception standpoint.
Yeah, and look at the target column by quarter. So first quarter, 7 targets. Second quarter, 14 targets. Third quarter, 12 targets. Fourth quarter, 7 targets. Again, you're not going to him on third down situations, high leverage downs, all right, money downs, and you're also not going to him often in the fourth quarter. So I wonder, what led to those type of targets and lack of targets in those big moments. Because again, I think he did change how defenses, could cover and what type of coverages they could run against the Bills when Cooper was on the field. We'll show you some splits here in a second. But it's just interesting to see how they came up with that strategy or game plan, what led to that. We're talking Joe Brady and the offensive staff.
Yeah. And, I think looking at him going forward, the potential of him coming back to this team, several questions that we have outlined. And, Erik, I guess I'll start with you because I know you penned a lot of these questions. Like, what are your thoughts on him potentially coming back to this team? Do you think it's worth it? Do you think he's replaceable in some other form or fashion, whether it's a more value free agent or a draftee, something like that? Like, what are your thoughts before we kind of break him down?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's if the mantra is still going to be everybody eats. I don't know if he's worth, I think Spot Track has him in the, 15 mil range? Hold on. And obviously take this with a grain of salt. 14.2 million average annual salary for Amari Cooper.
A decent chunk of change.
And honestly, Greg does a great job with the salary cap stuff. So tune in tonight at 9:00. They're going to be breaking down some of the market stuff and these free agents and, what's going to cost to bring them back. But it's a great question because I could really argue both sides. And, I want to bring up some stats courtesy of Sports Info Solutions and look at some of these metrics when we're talking splits of Amari Cooper being on versus off the field. And if you look at the passing metrics, when Cooper was on the field, right in the middle, passing EPA metrics, 0.33 versus off the field, 0.17. So it's a plus 0.16 EPA per play. Obviously, he changes some things when he's on the field. But what I also found interesting was how maybe he affected some of the run game stuff. So, as I scroll to those, I would love to hear your thoughts on that too. Like, if this is the mantra everyone eats,
Yeah.
do you want to pay this guy? He's going to be at least 10 mil, so 10 to 15 mil. Do you want to pay him? Can you pay him for this type of production, even if it is a little bit better next year?
Yeah, I think that's the big one for me. I would like. I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here in turn, especially with like having your cake and eating it too. Like, I would like that alpha presence or that true wide receiver one presence, especially from the schematic standpoint. A lot of the things that we talked about last offseason, like that true X, somebody who has the release, who can win in the stem, who can threaten vertically, who can win one-on-ones, like, because you're going to see that in these 3x1s or this style of the offense that the Bills run. But I like their more run established focus approach, the condensed formations, spreading of the ball in the run, in the pass. I don't think the way the offense found success this year necessarily demands you have to pay for that role.
Right.
But I do think they need that role. Like, so even if it's paying someone from a value standpoint, but who offers several of those skill set pieces, or you're bringing in a draftee that has some of those skill set pieces, I do think that role is needed. We talk about it every year with the wide receiver grouping, building the basketball lineup. They need that type of two guard kind of element that they don't have. I do think it is critical to the offense because even, again, granted, Cooper's usage, we saw those significant struggles versus single high, especially man, like before Cooper was brought in. And that impact versus the run, when teams are confident just loading the box and they're not fearful on the outside, it's a chain reaction from a negative standpoint against this Bills offense.
Right. And if you look at some of these passing numbers, look at average depth of target when Cooper is on the field, 9.6, 7.7 when he's off the field. Yards per attempt, 8.8 with Cooper on the field, 7.2 when he's off the field. Touchdown percentage, 6.9% to 5.4% when Cooper is off the field. So the passing game was obviously affected. Again, you can see that in almost every metric, advanced metric that there is. But what's not talked about often is how maybe he affected that run game or actually helped the run game when he was on. And so if you look at rushing tendencies here on the screen, courtesy of Sports Info Solutions, the stacked box percentage when Cooper was on the field was 28 versus 46 when he was off the field. So light box, 26 when Cooper was on the field, 17 when he's off the field. So he obviously opened up some things, whether that's more two high shells or to, worry about him getting deep and getting some of those explosive passes down the field.
Yeah.
You knew he made some kind of impact, whether it was on the points. I can't remember who found the stat about when, as soon as they acquired Cooper, they went on that like 30+ point run or whatever. And
I don't know.
Either way you look at it, like he did make an impact, even if you didn't see it with the production. It's hard to fathom though, how much you pay for that, how much you pay for that. Again, can you get someone, as you said, in free agency or in the draft at a lower cost that can do that can still open things up in the way that Cooper did?
And I think that's the exact question that I wanted us to like get to. And that is the question to like pose. Like, you need that skill set. You need that presence. You need that impact. It's not necessarily from a statistical standpoint. We don't need him to come in and average 8 catches a game and put up 1,200, 1,300 yards. But you need that skill set from an alleviation standpoint for the rest of the offense to allow it to breathe in the pass and the run, which again is a significant part of this offense. But then that's the question, like, what type of resource allocation do you need to get that skill set? Is it monetary? And if it is, how much? If it's draft capital, is it a first? Is it a second? Is it a third? Like, how do you balance that? And obviously that's what so many other teams are doing. But his role and that skill set, like we talked about last year, like we'll talk about this year when it comes to speed and or a true separator in the wide receiver room, is an element that the Bills wide receiver room and offense 100% needs. And it's just going to be how or when or are they able to kind of thread that needle to get that skill set and those traits without having to necessarily commit that type of financial capital, because the production isn't always going to warrant it, but the impact and the effect is felt schematically, and we saw it every week.
Yeah, and we talked about every week about some of the big plays he's made down the field, but I don't think we talked about how the rapport with Josh wasn't quite there totally.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking on script or off script, there were some plays off of script that, Josh was expecting Cooper to do this and he did that instead, and they weren't able to really connect. And we're going to show you some of these clips as we talk about it. I just don't, obviously a mid-season trade, that's going to happen. You expect that. And so we're going to show you some of those plays here on the screen. There were several miscommunications, whether it's, hey, he's on the backside of that 3x1 and he didn't read the leverage the same as Josh did. Josh throws it deep, he breaks off a route. That happens. That happens to every offense. It's not abnormal. I talked about some of the scramble drill stuff. It's as the season went on, you heard Alan talk about it, and we did an episode on it, how Josh was trying to give Keon and Amari Cooper shots down the field. He wasn't just trying to drop them in buckets perfectly every single time. He said, you know what? I'm just going to throw it up. The Jets game. And what happens? He goes up and gets it. And so I think Josh adjusted better as the season went on, but in the end, him and Cooper weren't quite on the same page. So the question asked in the comments about, hey, if he has a whole off season to work on the rapport and they do bring him back, could that make a difference? And yeah, I do think it could. But again, it's a fine line to walk when you're talking about the money that he's due because of how he's good and how good he's been in his career and how it's unfolded. And with the Bill
rapport based from a time on task perspective, especially when we're seeing Allen find this great off script rapport with like Ty Johnson, for example, or him being able to link up with Coleman at different points, or even Mack Hollins at times. Like you saw that connection, and you just didn't really see that manifest for Cooper and Allen. Is a lot of these plays that we're showing here in the background. There are some really nice plays. Apologies for my wife's laptop that is going off right now.
Yeah, and so these type of things, they do happen to every offense, and it would be nice to see, them bring him back and get on the same page and have that offseason where Josh is able to start reading Cooper better, whether we're talking within structure or outside of structure, because there were just times last year that wasn't the case. And the big question for me, to kind of wrap up this segment is, can Joe Brady even feature him? Because we've seen Joe struggle to feature Stephon Diggs. We saw him struggle this year to feature Dalton Kincaid. Can he even feature Cooper? Maybe the Mantra Eats thing is that's just the way that, Joe Brady scripts things, whether we're talking going into a game or how things unfold and how he adjusts with the game plan within the game. Do we even know if he can be featured? I feel like if anyone was featured this year, I'd say probably James Cook, but again, we're talking a completely different position when it comes to featuring someone. Having Josh hand it off is one thing, and that's probably on the back of Aaron Cromer more than Joe Brady. And so it's I don't know. I don't know if Brady can feature someone. We haven't really seen him feature a target, a wide receiver, whether we're talking wide receivers or tight ends. It's difficult to say, man. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you think he even knows how to feature, if that's something that he wants to do? Because that could also impact whether they do want to bring him back.
Yeah, I'm in the boat of I don't want to say like absence of evidence. I always say absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I think he could potentially. I just don't think that's his feature thing. I know what he did as the pass game coordinator with LSU that year, but I think of somebody who is a Sean Payton disciple. And I think of what were those Sean Payton offenses? Pierre Thomas and Reggie Bush and Deuce McAllister and Jimmy Graham. Who were the wide receivers? Marcus Colston and Devery Henderson and Robert Meacham and Ted Ginn. It was kind of a committee approach at wide receiver, but everything funneled schematically really around the running backs within the tight ends. And that's kind of what this Bills offense has been built, the tight ends, the running back. He's tremendous at featuring the running backs.
Yeah.
And I'm very much a fan of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And the run game and the pass game with the running backs is not broken. So I don't think the way the receivers operate necessarily commands the financial dollar that Cooper would. So if you can find even some semblances of his skill set at a reduced value from a cost standpoint or from a draft standpoint, I personally would rather pull the trigger that way, just because I don't think the money you give him is going to be the best value given how the offense works and what you could still find a way to piece together otherwise.
Yeah, and speaking, of piecing together, when we talk about Amari Cooper and the targets that the Bills, signed or brought in, last year. I mean, Mack Hollins, if there's a
Man,
guy that,
man,
what a ride he had
man.
in the Bills uniform last year. First 4 weeks or so, people were hating on him, hating on what he was
big
doing
time.
and what he brought to the team.
Look at our
He
wide
did,
receiver one, Mack
yeah,
Hollins. This sucks.
he did win them over. A big-bodied guy, obviously a huge personality, but really the epitome of what this regime has talked about from day one, and honestly, even the players say it probably even more than the coaches, that being the best version of themselves, but really just being themselves. He's really the epitome. They don't stop him from doing anything. Obviously a great glue guy, special teams guy. He did some awesome things when we're talking blocking, if we're going to start there, not just as a receiver, but blocking on runs and screens. And I mean, what were your thoughts on, him in that department? I know we had an idea what he could do. I didn't think he would make this much of an impact.
Yeah, he was, we'll start with like that dirtier stuff, but he was such an impact player as a blocker. And I know for some, this will sound like, well, maybe not now because everybody kind of became more endeared to him, but it'll sound like such a homer take. And it's not. Like, you see him, as the highlight showed there, gap without a puller. We're talking duo here. And you would watch him insert with regularity and fit off of the tight ends, off of the linemen in front. And you could watch him dig out and easily beat a corner like he's going to do on some of these plays. And he could dig out a safety. You could see him hit and get up on a linebacker. He could work things downfield, get in around the box. He gets on Brown here, the safety for the Niners there, and impacts him, and Cook is out the front. Just the physicality you saw him execute with regularity, but then also the technique. Like the first touchdown for James Cook against the Chiefs, he gets into McDuffie, chops his arm down. McDuffie almost falls on his face. It was like he snatch trapped him like mid out there in space. Just it was really nice to see. And just even leading off with these, like watching him, how he's fitting differently on these duo runs,
and the processing and IQ it takes to do this and read the tight end and tackle blocks, and then filling in and cleaning up the edges to get the ball on the perimeter. We saw that in time and time again, right, Ant? We saw it on these duo runs where you have the running back coming downhill, then bouncing outside. James Cook, huge year when it came to that. You're seeing Ray Davis on the screen do it here. We saw him finishing blocks on the boundary and just being that juice and energy in the spread game as a run blocker out wide or down the field. The screen, that screened Shavers, I believe, when he's running down the field, like waving everyone. And he's a great glue guy. He's a great guy to have on offense. And I would be interested to bring him back. I don't know how much that'll cost, but I would be interested to bring him back because of what he brings to, the run game. I mean, if you look at some of the metrics, his splits, the rushing EPA metrics, when he's on the field, 0.09. When he's off the field, negative 0.03. Dude, so he's making an impact there. And then, not just a run game, though, like the screens, just watch him on some of these screens where he's hitting those forced players. He's kicking guys out. He's doing the extra work, the dirty work that this offense needed when Gabe Davis left. He filled that role beautifully and then some when we're talking what he added in the red zone as a red zone target and some of those, passes down the field, down the seams. He was a great pickup, and I'm definitely interested in bringing him back. But my question to you, Ant, do they have a guy on the roster that is a younger, cheaper option that they drafted high that they could lean on to do a lot of these similar things? And it's almost to a T the type of player that Keon Coleman is. Am I wrong?
Yeah. Well, no, you're not wrong. But yeah, like that is, I think that's a really fair question for Mack. If you think you already have that guy in-house, and if he can do the Mack Hollins role with more of the ball-winning Keon Coleman stuff, then it's like, okay, now we almost have two birds for one stone with this spot. Now we can commit some capital maybe elsewhere. We can round out that room a little differently. I think that's the big question to ask.
Yeah.
And my heart wants Mack Hollins.
Yeah. The market right now is like 2.4 mil. So it's going to be cheap. It might be a little higher than that because I think he did earn a little pay raise. Yeah. But it's a tough question when you ask that, man. Like, because Coleman does a lot of these things, bro.
Yeah. And it's just can he make that jump and be consistently effective like Hollins was? Because for me, it was like what you said. Oh, nice from Tank Ninja saying, I noticed Hollins getting double teamed more on special teams. Yeah, he makes a difference on special teams.
Yes.
Mack Hollins.
He was the hot.
It was Mack Hollins. And even just from a numbers standpoint, Amongst the 9 players for the Bills, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends who had at least 20 targets this year, he was second on the team in EPA per target at 0.42. Ty Johnson was ahead of him, but he had 25 less targets, and Ty Johnson was this big playoff script monster. But Mack Hollins led the Bills receivers in EPA per targets, and then overall receiving EPA, he was second only to Khalil Shakir. And Shakir had a monster year at 33.29. Hollins was second at 21.03. Coleman, who missed some time with injury, was the third amongst the wide receivers at 16.64. I really liked what Hollins did. I like the attitude he brings. He just ticks so many, what I think the cost will be, the culture, the fit, like he is the epitome of a guy who does their 111th. I think he's the perfect like wide receiver 4 who can be a special teamer blocker, can moonlight as a wide receiver 3, can eat a ton of snaps, is effective as a blocker against a multitude of body types, but also can function as an actual receiver in the pass game. Yeah, I would welcome him back with open arms and shoeless feet.
Yeah, he's a glue guy, blocking, run game, screen game, finishing blocks, juice, energy. Yeah. We didn't even get to show any of the plays of the rubs on the mesh concepts. Yeah. He was the stuff he does in that regard.
He's
uncanny.
He's such a good processor in his feel for space. And even too, like, he's got some sandpaper to him. Like, you see him talking smack a little bit. Like, he gets in guys' faces. Like, he adds a lot. Like, he's from a hockey terminology for like, he's that fourth liner who's so great at killing penalties, but has a little scoring pop, but is that toughness you need? Like, give me Mack Hollins back. Anywhere from 2.5 to even 3.5, like AAV, I would welcome him back with open arms.
Same. Yeah, I'm okay with bringing him back. So let's stay on the offensive side of the ball. Ty Johnson, you mentioned him, big play guy, big play on third downs, especially a lot of them, outside of script, Josh trusted him. He was a great change of pace.
He turned into like Randy Moss on third downs and off script, man.
Like,
it was
who
wild.
is this?
Yeah.
But we got to see some of the explosiveness in the run and pass game, but primarily, third downs down the field. He was a playmaker for the Bills, and we're not just talking receiving or running on third downs, but he was their best pass blocker. 31 pass pro reps to James Cook's 14 to Ray Davis's 11 pass pro reps. Very good blocker in that regard. His football IQ is better than the other two backs at this point in his career. And I think that stood out. Were his blocks always perfect? No, but he always identified the closest threat when they're asking him to read two guys. All right. And that's something that a lot of running backs have to do. It's called scan protection. They have to scan one to another. And so you saw him there. You saw him as, a lot of the vertical passing game, sometimes on script or within structure. But he was just a fun player to add. I mean, they added him in like March or something like that, right?
And they brought him back almost like right away.
Yeah. And so he's another guy that value-wise, I think he helped his value. I think his name's out there now. He was mentioned a lot this year. I do think he's got some cash this year on the market, but again, it's a running back market.
Yeah.
But my question to you, Ant, is, given his role and what he's done this past year, one, should they bring him back? But two, if James Cook is about to be paid, we'll talk about that next week. Yeah. Teaser. We're doing a James Cook breakdown next week. If they pay, hypothetically, if they were to pay Cook, they obviously drafted Ray Davis.
Yeah.
Do they want to commit more money to a third down running back and Ty Johnson? Or would you rather have them lean on the resources they've committed in the draft and obviously with James Cook and Ray Davis?
I'm so significantly torn on this question. It's so hard because I love running backs, but I also recognize the value and the market. And then with the Bills backs in particular, I just like, if you tell me right now,
O-line,
hey,
right? Their backs and their O-line.
Yes.
Their O-line.
Fair point. Like, just if you tell me right now that it's a money down, it's third down, I want Ty Johnson on the field because he's a good it's not even that he's their best pass protector. He's legitimately good at it. But then also he can run the ball with some pop. He's this weird mix of like thickness, size, frame, speed, juice, short area burst, receiving ability, and pass pro. Like he's like the perfect utility back. I thought he was good when he was with the Jets. I thought he would get more shine, and he didn't. And then he's been kind of a journeyman back who fell into the Bills' lap. And I would love to not have to diversify as much So if you told me that Ray Davis could start to mimic more of that productivity in pass pro as Ty Johnson, or if Cook could take another jump up in pass pro,
which he actually did
yes,
right? We've highlighted that.
Yes,
He did a lot better this year.
Yeah.
And so there is that possibility that both of those guys could develop enough to close that gap, right?
Yes. It is just like right now for me, I would still bring him back, even if granted it's the cost. But I think he offers the high leverage value. Even if he's only on the field for like 12 snaps a game, I feel like those 12 snaps are probably going to be important. He's probably touching the ball, I don't know, like 4 to 6 out of those. And then he's providing good pass pro. He knows how to leak out at the right time and feel and make himself
Good
open.
read,
He's
no
he's
doubt.
great at being QB friendly all jokes aside, like the scramble drill, like it's a legitimate skill. Like he knows how to find open
Zero
space.
drops.
Yeah, bro. There you go. Talk about
3
it. Like
for Cook. So, okay, you said like he had 115 snaps overall, 61 rushing attempts, 307 yards. That's 5 a carry, 1 touchdown. He had 29 targets in the passing game, 22 receptions, 318 yards. 318 yards. James Cook had 322. 1.38 yards per route run. But my question is, okay, he had 61 rushing attempts. What's interesting when you look at and break that down is if you look at how many of them were zone versus gap, of the 61 attempts, 49 of those came on zone runs. So 11 were gap runs. So he's more of a zone runner. And it makes sense. You talked about how, he's elusive and he's kind of thicker than the other backs, kind of a decent change of pace, but he's mainly a zone runner. That's what was his calling card.
Say mid zone, outside zone. That's him. Yeah.
And not a bad thing. The Bills run a lot of that.
Yeah.
But is that a little too one-dimensional? Because you look at James Cook, zone versus gap, 134 zone, 125 gap. Ray Davis, 50 zone, 68 gap. So, again, I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate.
Oh, yeah.
Can you replace him with maybe it's not 1 for 1. Can you replace him with a different free agent or a cheaper free agent or someone in the draft?
Yeah.
And lean on the guys you drafted high to, again, close the gap. Close the gap because he doesn't run much gap.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was waiting for the pun. Like I was waiting for a joke. That was very good.
But he was amazing. He was so clutch. And so one thing he's got on his side, aside from all the film and stats, Josh loves him.
Yes.
I think he's back. I think Josh loves him. Usually that keeps you on the team.
That's fair. Yeah. And I just think he fits. And I'm not worried about the running, like Cook and Davis closing the gap from like an actual running back standpoint, like carries and like touches, targets, all that kind of stuff. Some in the target game, because again, what Ty Johnson was off script, but also some of that again tied into the pass pro and him scanning and there's no one there. So let me leak out or let me run this route and do this. His feel was so good. I just don't know if any of them can close the gap enough from a pass pro third down scenario to make me not want him on the team. Or to the opposite point, and kind of what you mentioned a little bit, like if he goes, my thought is like, I feel like you have to look for a running back in the draft or free agency to maybe replace him from a pass pro standpoint, just because that's something that's
his specialty, right? Maybe it's a 5th, 6th, 7th rounder.
Yes.
And his specialty is pass blocking. It would be very specialized and obviously likely not as well-rounded, especially with the experience that Ty has, not just in the NFL, but in the Bills offense. And Spot Track has him at 2.7 mil. I think that's fair. But again, you're paying him that as a number 3. And you have 2 high, again, one that's on the verge of possibly getting a huge contract if the Bills and being decide to. I don't know, man. It's a hard question, but I do think in the end, Josh trusts him. This regime trusts him. He made big plays. He earned it.
Yeah.
And Josh loves him. I think he's back. I think he's like Matt Barkley. He just ends up back on the team again.
Yeah. Allen's like, I want him back. They're like, all right, cool. Let's commit to it.
Yeah.
I do think that's an interesting, and again, spoiler a little bit as we're going to dive into some James Cook, not even some, all James Cook next week. That will be a heavy talking point in terms of second contract, the value, what he is, who he is, what he could potentially still be. And Ty Johnson obviously factors in significantly to that, because if you're going to pay Cook what he probably is going to get on the market, it's going to be tough to kind of justify having that 3-headed type of monster. But again, another fun conversation for next week. Erik, let's pivot to the defensive side of the ball and start with one of the Bills starting corners from this past year who has a cap hit for 2025, but is a UFA, Mr. Rasul Douglas. What are your thoughts on Rasul Douglas?
All right, so let's start off with what, his projected market value. He's over 30 years old right now. Spot Track has him at 11.9 mil. Again, take it with a grain of salt. Watch Greg and Aaron later. They'll break it down better. And Greg is, he's a whiz. He's like Rain Man when it comes to this stuff. We like to stay in our lane and focus on the film and scouting and evaluation. So keep that in mind. When it came to him, dude, his play last year was amazing. It was amazing. He was creating turnovers. He was a difference maker. This year it wasn't the same, man. It felt like he either lost a step or he was half a step behind from the shoulders up. Either way, he wasn't playing as fast. Part of me wonders how much not having Poyer and Hyde help him on the back end and all the shifting in the safety room this year and changes there and lack of like experience of those two. Maybe that affected Rasul Douglas this year, but either way, he was playing a little bit slower. There was a lot more separation in man coverage, especially, but also even in zone stuff, like stuff that he used to just like overlap or like bait someone in zone. You didn't see much of it this year. And so I didn't think he had that good of a season, but the big thing, he allowed a lot of explosive plays, which, that is a big no-no in the Bills defense.
Yeah, I mean, for years, they have been one of the best defenses in terms of limiting explosive plays. And yeah, we just didn't. I lean a bit more towards the, maybe there was some underlying injury we weren't aware of, or it's father time catching up with him a little bit. Like, because he is so experienced. And I do think that is a fair point. Like, you not having that safety tandem behind you.
Because he did talk about that. Remember that?
Yes.
He's like, those guys were at times just calling out what to do, like what was coming. Like they knew the defense better than anyone on the field, and they did help him. And so I don't know, maybe the Raps of the world, the Hamlins, the Bishops, they weren't that boost. And not that he needs it, but it makes a difference having that communication experience on the back end like Poyer and Hyde did.
Absolutely. And you couple that with all the changes in the coaching staff, new defensive coordinator, new position coaches, all these things there. And so I can understand that a bit. And so I think that's a very fair comment. And whatever it is, to your point, I know he wasn't the most athletic or fleet of foot guy. It just looked like he did not have that juice. And I appreciate his skill set and what he is, especially as a tackler and a physical presence. But you just saw more, even more like that first play we just showed, like him getting lost in coverage from a spatial awareness standpoint. That was my favorite thing from him in studying the Green Bay tape. Like, you talked about it. Like, he was that perfect guy who, like, oh, it's cover 3 and someone's going across. I'm not going to take that bait. I'm going to stay back and I'm catching the crosser coming from the other side. His spatial awareness was always so strong, and that suffered a lot this year. And I don't think that's necessarily due to just
fans saying he gambled too much when we got him. Yeah. And that kind of leads me into my next point is I do agree there's some of that, but that's why he created 6 turnovers, takeaways last year. We're talking interceptions and forced fumbles where he had 0 this year. Good in that regard when we're talking pressure. So a guy like Rasul Douglas, he's very good as a gambler per se, when the ball has to come out quick because a good pressure is called or the D lines, hunting the quarterback. The Bills were 21st in pressure percentage at 33.6%. So there were times, as you're seeing on something like and so I think he's still a good off-zone corner. I think he's a very good tackler, especially when those screens are trying to throw those wide receiver screens.
Absolutely.
He blew those up almost every week. I think he still has value. But my question, Anthony, is that what the Kaiir Elam played against the Chiefs when they asked him to be who he is, a man cover corner? That's not Douglas. But when they put Elam in after the Benford injury, you saw him struggle. So that almost makes this decision with Douglas that much more important.
And I remember you and I were both sneaky, like, hey, man, if they took Kool-Aid McKinstry in like the first round of the draft last year, we would not be upset. Like, I was already kind of thinking corner was a need last year. I think it's a big one right now just because of this exact question and then how it ties into corner 3. I'm torn with with what I want versus what I think will happen, because I do think he still ticks a lot of those archetype like fit boxes for what they want from a corner. Even just the basic, like what he is as a force player and actually coming up and making tackles, or having him blitz from the short side, like coming up and he can blow up runs. He'll take on pulling guards. He's beating linemen in space on tunnel screens and making tackles. Like, he offers you that. But I personally would like more athleticism at that corner spot. I would like a bit more juice. I would obviously someone that is also a scheme fit, not necessarily just traits and juice like Kyrie Elam was, because that did not work out. But I would like more athleticism. And then that ties in, again, to what they do at corner 3. Because if you bring in someone else, or you do keep Douglas, okay, if you keep Douglas, do you try to find a corner 3 who's a little more polished and still gives you some juice, because you don't really trust Kyrie Elam? And then another point that, you've got, how does Christian Benford's contract affect like what they do with Douglas, or corner 2 or corner 3? Like, how pot committed are they financially and or to that position group? Corner is a real, maybe not sneaky as much now for folks, but I do think it's a very interesting position with a lot of different domino effects and avenues that it can go down based off what they do with Benford and then what they choose to do at corner 2. It's a really interesting spot for them.
Yeah, and I talked about the explosive plays that he surrendered. He had a 19.4% explosive completion percentage against him as a primary defender. Elam was right there at 19.4%. The league average is 14%. So it shows you how bad they were in overall coverage on explosive plays, which is a big no-no. But when you filter it to man coverage, it's even higher. If you look at the explosive percentage here against them and the Bills overall, they weren't good in man coverage, especially when it comes to allowing those big plays down the field. For true media, it's 16 yards or more. So not 20, 16 yards or more. Rasul Douglas, he allowed a 23.1% explosive play percentage. Taron Johnson struggled in man coverage on these big plays down the field.
Benford. Look at Benford, though.
Oh, dude. It's not even fair. It's like, pay me now. All the numbers, if you look at Christian Benford at 5.9% explosive play percentage in man coverage, obviously amazing yards per attempt. He surrendered 2.2, 5 completions out of 17 targets for 38 yards, a 39.6 opponent QB rating. Like, he's filthy. Sign him. Sign him now. Extend him now. Yes. But again, you talked about athleticism, and we're not just talking man, because you got to be able to play both. But you can see the Bills were not good in man coverage last year, and they didn't play a lot of it. But when they did, and you saw some of it in the Chiefs game, it was exposed. And we saw when Benford got hurt, how they were exposed. So we're talking cornerback 2 and Rasul Douglas. We're talking about Kyrie Elam. That the game from those two in that big game, it really got me thinking, and I'm sure it got Bean thinking, because he talked about in his presser and how they're injury riddled at one position. He won't get specific about it, and they were taking advantage of it. Was like, hello,
gotcha.
Corner. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they go in a different direction, not just with Rasul Douglas or Kyrie Elam. Those are whole different podcast episodes and breakdowns.
Yes.
But with the archetype of the position, given the fact that running the ball is kind of coming back around. All right. And when teams run the ball well against you, a lot of times teams want to just go to man. They want to man up so they can load the box and play those post safeties deep, single high post safeties. So they have everyone accounted for. If the Bills are going with the trends of the league, I think they're going to have to change archetype and change what they look for in a corner.
I second that notion completely. Like, if we are going in that direction, I think in the secondary as a whole, I think they need more athleticism. We'll see what happens with, as another person we're going to talk about, Damar Hamlin, or the safety group in general. Even Taylor Rapp, like, he signed a 3-year deal last year, but he has an easy out this year from a dead cap standpoint. He could be gone. You've got athleticism with Bishop, but I think looking at that grouping, again, with the league trends and where they're going, I think you need more athleticism in your secondary, and it starts for me at that corner spot. I just think they have to. Again, they're not going to become this primarily, man coverage defense, because no one is. But working in more, whether it means working in more man with their odd mirror stuff, which they like to go to, or just in general, whether it's 2-man, cover 1, whatever, or maybe they want to blitz a little bit more and play like true man on that back end. I just don't think they have the horses for it. And to get the horses for it, you might have to trade out some of the horses you have now. And so, yeah, I'm in lockstep with you, like in terms of eyes on that spot, thinking of it. I do think they have to move in a different direction. I'd love for Rasul Douglas to be corner 3. If you would get him on a cost-effective thing somehow and he's corner 3, I would welcome that with open arms because of his experience and what he does tick. But I do think they need more athleticism at that position, along with, again, that safety spot, which I mentioned, Erik, Damar, Hamlin. Not a polarizing guy at all for anyone in the Bills fan base. Everyone is unanimous on their feelings and thoughts on him. He is not divisive in any way, shape, or form.
No.
But yeah, we'll stay on the defensive side of the ball, stay in the secondary. Damar Hamlin, someone who I don't think a lot of folks had him pegged as a starter going into the season. And whether it was Mike Edwards not working out, Cole Bishop getting banged up during training camp, whatever the reason, or maybe it was Hamlin's spot all along, he was the starting safety, one of them for the Buffalo Bills this year, and he was a very talked about person almost week in and week out amongst the fan base.
And let's start off with, like, it's amazing that he's even playing football, let alone was the starter this year. Like,
yeah, that's
wow,
a very good point.
The brass and the mental toughness it took for him to get back on the field to play football again.
Crazy.
I don't know if I could do it. And
I can't imagine wanting to, I remember when I hurt my knee really bad, and every time I cut, I was worried and hesitant, and I got over it eventually. I can't imagine essentially dying on the field.
Yeah.
In what wasn't it was a regular football thing that hurt him. To overcome that mentally and get yourself in it, that takes a level of mental toughness that is just absolutely unreal. Yeah, great call.
And so if we're looking at the safety spot, I know a lot of people want Cole Bishop to start, and I'm one of them. I do think he adds a different element. I do think Taylor Rapp is probably back no matter what. Obviously, he had some concussions and whatnot, some injuries or whatever. And so I do think they see him as a starter, and he's pretty important back there when it comes to communication. If you look at some of the splits and film of him on and off the field,
he makes a lot of guys right. He became a central part of that brain trust, along with Bernard and Taryn. They were a huge triangle in terms of communication and get right pre-snap.
I do think Hamlin brings a certain floor, or and he obviously knows the system, but I think the coaches know what he can do, and that's half the battle a lot of the time when you're trying to balance a roster and really put guys in situations to succeed. I think they know him really well, but he's improved as a tackler. There's no doubt. Everyone knows that. Open field tackles, he saved some points in almost every game, especially the big games, like the Ravens game or whatnot. Yeah. Some really good open field tackles.
He had tackles on Henry in that one that stopped him from going big. He stopped a lot.
But he does have a certain level of limited athleticism. I think there's no doubt. You can't deny that. There's only so much that he can do from the shoulders up to overcome that or make up for that. Yeah. He's not hawking people down from behind, thanks to his speed or anything like that. He has to rely on his processing to overcome a lot of that limited athleticism. So overall, I think his floor is good. I mean, Spot Track has him at 3.1 million. Again, take that with a grain of salt. Yeah. I think if they were to bring him back, I'll approach from this angle. If they were to bring him back, you're in competition. You're not a sole starter, which I think he'd be up for that. Honestly, I think he'd be up for that. I think he recognizes what he's built in Buffalo. And I think the time and experience and blood, sweat, and tears really it resonates with him in Buffalo. And Buffalo is kind of like where he played college when we're talking Pitt. So I do see him, like, the Bills being interested in bringing him back, but I still think that they want Cole Bishop to take the job. Cole Bishop didn't quite do that this past year. And he's got a long ways to go himself. So, but my question, Ant, and I'll give you, your 2 cents. You can share your 2 cents on Hamlin, the player. But my question is, again, with the trends of the league. Yeah. And with what the Bills struggled with, what they did well last year, Bobby Babich, the coordinator, is that safety room changing? Does it need to change, much like the cornerback room?
Yeah, that's the question to ask again. And I think if it's Bishop and Rapp, in theory, you're good enough to get it done where football is going from a trend standpoint. In an ideal world, I would like a bit more athleticism in both guys, or just somebody who I'm going to tie it back to Micah Hyde, right? Because Hyde wasn't the biggest sprinter, this great like alpha athlete,
Right.
but he was such a good processor and took such great angles to the ball that he had this amazing range. And it wasn't purely because of foot speed. He wasn't slow, but it was angles, it was reading, it was ball tracking, it was all of that. I do think they need more of a center field presence, especially if they have to continue to gap out versus the run and they have to play more single high. Cole Bishop has the athleticism to play that post safety. I don't think he's terrible with it, but I also like him more around the box, which is also where I kind of like Taylor Rapp a bit. Like, so there's the overlap and redundancy a little bit. I still have some questions. I liked Cole Bishop as the player. The fit I always thought was interesting. I thought he'd be better in a defense that was less standardized, like the Bills. Like, I put him in the Patriots defense or the Ravens defense, where he might be a deep safety, he might be an apex, he might be off-ball linebacker, and he's blitzing or he's doing all these things. But the safety room, I think, is really interesting because I echo everything on Hamlin. I'm not going to drill down on that too much. I think he's a tremendous depth guy, very high floor. He's just not a force multiplier in any way, shape, or form at that spot. And I would like more of that. I would like more athleticism in the group overall. I think Bishop is enough to do it. But what we saw from him, I think there's significant question marks. And I agree with you, though, that they do want him to be the starter. You spent a second-round pick on him. You want him to take that spot. It's just a question of can he? And if he does, how much can he make those strides in terms of adjusting and kind of getting on track in year two? I am really interested in this spot. The secondary is very interesting to me this entire offseason in terms of seeing if they move towards league trends or just kind of dance with the girl that brought them and stay with who they are and say, no, this has worked for us. We're going to continue to operate how we have with what we gravitate towards from an architect fit and standpoint.
Yeah, and being he's the type of guy that's not going to just blow up the roster, or McDermott's not going to blow up his scheme or philosophy because they were 2 or 3 plays away from the Super Bowl. I think they've come out and said that directly, and so I don't expect a huge change. But the question is, do they not necessarily just move away from Hamlin, but do they bring and invest in either another veteran or a younger player, maybe not as high a draft pick, to compete with Cole and push Cole, because they still need to do that. They're still going to have to push Cole, whether it's a Hamlin or someone else, because from everything that the coaches have talked about and said in not so many different ways and words, he's still got a lot to learn. And we saw that with the film too. And he made a lot of mistakes. And he left Rasul Douglas out to dry.
At Houston, early on. He had some real nice flashes, but also some, there's the rookie. There's the guy who's still learning some of those moments. Or you know what? We could just, eat our losses and just blanket it and just sign Javon Holland. And there we go. Everything's all set back there.
Or Julian Blackman. I like Blackman too from the Colts.
You're still okay. Still
I do like him.
That's fine.
And,
or maybe Malachi Starks from Georgia or something like. Oh man. Yeah. Darius. Oh, dude. So many fun options. I don't want to get too excited about safeties. No. I can't do it right now. We'll be here forever.
All right. Let's go into Dawuane Smoot. He's our last real in-depth guy we're going to look at, and then we'll just rattle off some takeaways on the rest of the roster. Dawuane Smoot, I thought he had a really interesting role this year as a pass rusher, a third or fourth DN, depending on how you look at it. Very violent, disruptive, his high motor guy. They had to kind of replace that role of like Shaq Lawson. And I think Smoot did that and more. But what I found interesting after going back and watching film the last few days on him was the role that he played, not just bumping inside as that D tackle, but how he was relied on calling a lot of the line calls on those third downs. Okay, so listen to this quote, guys, from McDermott from earlier in the year. He says that Dawuane Smoot, well, it was a role that we needed. We'd been looking for it for some time, and being able to find the right person is hard because you have to have certain traits that go with that role. So we're fortunate that we were able to find him, and he has some of those traits. One of the earlier people that you'll remember was Kyle Williams, to be able to do some things and call some fronts for us. That's what Smoot was doing for the Bills this last year. He goes, McDermott adds, I feel like we've had maybe 1 or 2 in between there as far as players making those calls on the field on third downs. But it's nice when you can find that person. I think Smoot did a lot of that this year, to some good, some bad. But I'm going to bring up some film as I get your thoughts on it. But just watch his leadership on the field on these passing downs, these high leverage calls. Look at him work, setting the defense, calling the stunts. That's what Kyle Williams used to do for the Bills. And again, if they don't bring Smoot back, I do think they need another guy like this, because what we've seen from the coaches in West, and then they brought, was it Jason Rebovich back
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
D-line coach, assistant D-line coach. That's a wait and see, man, because a lot of people, a lot of fans aren't happy with that. But I think they do need this kind of guy in the locker room, on the field, in these high leverage situations.
Yeah, that was a great poll. It's something I noted, and I guess I never really paid attention to it too much, but he had a bit of some air traffic controller to him up front. And you saw that reflected in McDermott's quote that you read, which was a great poll from you, all that type of stuff. And him being able to play on the edge, kick a little inside. He can play a little 4-eye. He can kick inside on third down further on your NASCAR package and operate as more of a true defensive tackle type and get one-on-one with guards. And you have him shaded there versus the right tackle in terms of more of a 4-eye there. Little bit of a front versatility, but here he is. Now he's dropping out, looking at getting into coverage, showing some athleticism.
Yeah, and they were running Palms coverage. Look at him call it. Look, you see, he's setting the defense out. Look right there. Palms. He knows he's the dropper. Like, this is big. Like, having that kind of role player is huge.
That's wild to have your like what, third or fourth defensive end calling out the coverage stuff, relaying it, being responsible. That's tremendously heady. I liked him as a player coming from Jacksonville. I like the role he occupied here. Big thing for me, which I know you loved as well. Uncanny ability to just show up on third and fourth downs and short, like just getting some level of edge. Yeah, blowing something up, taking somebody out, or making the stop himself. Real uncanny knack for that. I would like him more if the production of the guys ahead of him was higher from a pass rushly favor available, no matter who they replace him with, if they do.
And this was something that obviously this staff, looked for in free agency. Not just a guy that could bump inside, but someone that could be that general on the field with that new D-line coach coming in and all that. And so I think that you're trying to find someone that does, like, it's hard. I searched, the internet for,
the internet
to find other guys that did this, as consistently as what the Bills had talked about.
It's not a common thing.
It's not. It's not, man. And so it's gonna be difficult to find someone like that. But what worried me when I looked at his stats, and maybe it's because they bumped him inside so often, was that bump inside
and he's spiking to clear somebody else.
Right. So again, maybe there's some context there. But either way, I like him. I think he's better than what his pass rush productivity showed. But there's no doubt he brings a lot of value, versatility, leadership, that hustle, that motor. And then that's the calls, like that's very difficult to find. So I'm okay with bringing him back. But again, it may take away from a guy they're trying to develop in Solomon and things like that. But I think it's going to be relatively cheap to bring him back to compete. And then if it doesn't work out, if they draft someone or whatever type of transaction, then they can just cut him loose. But I do think that they had a huge role for him going into the season. He got hurt early and, so it took him a little while to get going, but they had this role mapped out. And so it wouldn't surprise me that they bring him back, or at the very least, try to find someone that can do a lot of what he does, whether it's a big DN that can bump inside, or again, maybe it's a veteran that does some similar things prior to the snap. When we're talking those line calls.
Yeah. And his market value on Spot Track, I think is pretty fair. 2.9 average annual value at this point. He's lumped in with guys like Dean Lowry and Tyquan Lewis and Emmanuel Agba and Tano Passignon. So I think that is comparable. My overall I like Smoot as a player, and I like him coming back and the idea of it. And I know this is very much not necessarily pie in the sky, but it's probably something that's not going to happen. I just want more archetype changes at defensive end. I just want more bend or athleticism or juice, for the love of God. The pocket compression is sweet and length and strength is awesome, but I would just like a little more bend and a little more juice at that spot. And he's not a move in that direction, but he definitely provides value. I am not opposed to him coming back. I just question more of that archetype, him being another drop in that bucket. Like if we're talking about, the edge grouping as like a basketball lineup, everybody's a power forward. That's what it is. Like everybody, that's it. And they have like one point guard or shooting guard. That's it. Everyone plays the same position. which
And
is
they're all like
awful.
rebounders.
Yes, that's it. Like they're all power forwards who don't stretch the floor, who don't shoot threes. They all just like get rebounds and try and back you down in the paint. That's it. And that can be sweet, but also can, for the love of God, we have something different at some point. I don't think that is necessarily going to happen. But again, that calling ability from a front standpoint and the communication and the knowledge, that provides tremendous value. I just wish there was some different skill sets or traits in the rest of that room or group to make me feel better about adding another drop in that bucket.
All right, let's do some quick hits before we get out of here. We'll stay on the defensive side, especially the D-line. Quinton Jefferson, Jordan Phillips. Jefferson, 31.8 years old, according to Spot Track. 32.3 for Jordan Phillips. Obviously, a lot of experience. We're talking in the Bill system. Some flashes last year, but these are guys that are a little over the hill at this point, and probably guys that you could pick up off the street as the season starts next year. In my opinion, type of guys that I love, the juice that Jordan Phillips brings, and Jefferson for that matter. But I'm looking in a different direction, as you said, kind of playing to the, hey, we need some new blood, we need some new athleticism. And if they don't work out early next year, and whether it's a draft pick or another veteran, these type of guys are going to be on the street.
Yeah, I no disrespect to either of them because they're both NFL caliber players, but I think they're more of a dime a dozen that you can kind of. Granted, for better or for worse, Jordan Phillips always seems to play his best ball whenever he's in Buffalo. I watched him get displaced far too much against the run to just be comfortable. I'm just so pissed. And then like watching him get blown off the ball 4 yards, and then the next play he's trying to hype everybody. I'm like, you just got blown off the ball 5 yards. Stop.
I mean, speaking of that, Austin Johnson too. Let's lump him in there. He's a free agent. Those three guys, like again, they'll be there if things don't work out with whatever direction Dean goes. They'll be there, right?
Exactly. If your A through W plans don't work, they'll be there for like those contingency plans if you really, really, really need it. And yeah, I would like to get some new blood, get some more cost control, younger guys that you can develop or have more of an effective skill set at this point. For me, I think they're more of kind of last resorts than they are prioritized regular. Even from a rotational standpoint, I would rather move towards other pieces. Oh, we got to stop. We got a super chat from Carl. Carl, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Oh, Carl is already focused on draft talk already. Carl says, hey, guys, we cannot get Mason Graham, defensive tackle from Michigan, arguably a top 5 pick already in this draft. And he says, but the defensive line needs to improve. Would you jump up a few spots to get Kenneth Grant from Michigan and have him compete with Daquan Jones? Would Grant help Ed Oliver and company? Erik, I don't know where you are with your draft prep at this point, but any thoughts on Kenneth Grant from Michigan or maybe a potential other defensive tackle that you think could be a scheme fit that they could target early at some point in this draft?
I like Grant. I think he would help Ed Oliver. I would love to see him at the nose tackle position in the Bills defense, but I do wonder if he's too much of a 2-down player.
Fair.
I want to see more as far as pass rushers go, a pass rush standpoint for him. But I think when it comes to that position, a couple guys that I'm higher on, aside from Mason Graham, because that guy's a stud.
Oh, he's such a monster.
I've been really high on Derek Harmon. I think he is Daquan Jones.
Scheme
I think it's a Daquan Jones clone. I think it's a Daquan Jones clone. I think he offers a little more juice. A little more
Daquan Jones clone. I like it.
As a pass rusher, I think he's multidimensional. He can play 5 tech and odd fronts. He can play 3 tech, some nose tackle. He's got the size. He's my crush right now and scheme fit, as you said. A guy later that's more of a scheme fit, but that's probably not as high. TJ Sanders, who I took a look at the other day.
South Carolina.
Yeah. Another scheme fit too. More flashy than consistent, but those are two guys I like. I like Grant. I like Mason Graham better. Grant, he worries me when it comes to the, third down. Can he stay out there as a pass rusher and make a difference? I don't know that yet because they would pull him off the field on those downs. And so that is a great question from Carl there. And I coincidentally enough, I started on the defensive side of the ball at D tackle. So it tells you where I'm focused.
I started with a mix of defensive tackle and safety. So I started with Kenneth Grant and was just watching Mason Graham at the same time. So I watched a bit of Grant. I've watched 3 defensive tackles so far. This is hilariously ironic. Grant, Harmon, and TJ Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
And I doubled with TJ Sanders because I was also watching some Nick Emenwari, the safety for South Carolina as well. But yeah, I really like, I'm in lockstep with you for Harmon being like, if I had to bet on one of them, if they're both there at the end of the first round, I think Harmon just ticks so many scheme fit boxes. And then his hand usage, how he plays with leverage, block deconstruction, and even some power at the point of attack. I think he could work a little bit against double teams, like in terms of his technique and how he plays against some of these pieces. Grant for me, I don't want to get too excited because I just, exactly to your point, I want someone like Kenneth Grant. I want more stoutness in the inside. And if you can get someone who's stout and also have a little juice, I really love that. They really want you to have like true 3-down versatility and viability if you are inside. So that's the only thing that gets me off of that. But yeah, I do think that defensive tackle spot is a need. Great question, Carl. Thank you for that.
Yeah, awesome stuff. And so let's wrap up the free agents. One guy I think is a lock. You got to bring back Reggie Gilliam, fullback.
Oh, yes.
Special teams, his blocking, as far as fullback goes, his usage is important to the Bills.
I think they should use him more. That's my only note for Reggie Gilliam. I would like to see more 21 with him on the field.
So I think he justifies a roster spot. And you bring him back. I think he's one of those glue guys that no one really even talks about for that matter. Anyone else that you want to cover from the free agency list that maybe we missed out? We can give a quick take on Reed Ferguson. Quintin Morris is a restricted free agent. Tommy Doyle retired. Good luck to him in his second career. Let's see. We talked about Hamlin. Alec Anderson's is exclusive rights. I mean, Reed Ferguson, I don't have much. I'm not going to sit here and study snapping, but I just know it's important to the kicker after talking to Jay Feely. And so, bring him back.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I'll welcome him back. Fan favorite. Yeah, I'm cool with Reed Ferguson. I do like, I think we talked about the mains. Give me Reggie Gilliam with open arms. I would actually like to see him used more. I do like Quintin Morris as the third tight end. He offers you a little bit of a receiving ability. Just obviously being a former receiver. I like him as a blocker. And I wish, granted, yes. And granted, they're different sizes and frames. I wish Dalton Kincaid could block as good as Quintin Morris. And if you could just inject some of that into Kincaid maybe a little bit and maintain all the athleticism and fluidity at the same time, that would be amazing.
Well, let me ask you this. I like Morris too. I don't know what it's going to, whatever tender they're going to put on him. But if you're bringing Gilliam back as a lock, what can Gilliam do as a tight end 3? He can be that tight end 3. So again, if you're trying to eliminate some roles and maybe you want to add a different player, a different position, you could substitute Gilliam as a tight end 3. Again, I don't think it's going to cost a lot as far as tender goes to bring Morris back, but it's a question you could ask yourself. You could very easily install Gilliam as a tight end 3, quasi H-back, fullback, and probably not lose too much. When they use Morris as a tight end 3, it's usually for the run game.
Yes. And especially when you even let's tie it even to another guy who we talked about earlier, Mack Hollins, like what you can get out of that type of quasi role. If you want to make it like an H type of deal and just generally label it as best you can, what you can get from that, I think, and not to mention too, that the tight ends that are going to be ahead of Morris are going to see a lot of snaps in Dawson, Knox, and Kincaid. Yeah. So I like Morris, but I think it would really have to be very low cost to kind of bring him back just because I think you can kind of value out his role in a multitude of other ways. And that was kind of just my big one. I really like Alec Anderson. I would welcome him back with arms wide open as well. That 6 offensive lineman set is very valuable. We saw it with David Edwards. We saw it with Alec Anderson. I do think, and if it's not Anderson, like they need to commit to that because that package is a win for them the past 2 seasons. And it's very, 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 very important. And also kind of in line with some league trends and things that we're seeing.
They set the trend. 182 snaps with 6 linemen on the field.
No, the Ravens set that trend because they did it one time against the Steelers, 15 in the wild
card. Come on. I don't want to go back. I'm
not that guy. I really, really like the Ravens, but it pissed me off that how many times are we showing 6 offensive lineman sets throughout the entirety of the year? And the Ravens do it a bunch one time, and everybody nationally is like, the Ravens created 6 offensive lineman sets. I'm like, get the hell out of here, man.
And it's important because it's a great teaser for next week when we're talking James Cook. I'm trying to get him on the show. little sneak peek. I'm trying to get
We
him on the
tried a couple
show.
years ago. Remember we were talking about him
I
when
got
we
to I
went to
got
the
to up the
scrimmage.
budget
He
apparently.
he charged.
I got to up the budget. I'm going to try to make it happen, but we'll see. New tax year. It's important when we're talking James Cook because James Cook flourished with those condensed sets with the 6 offensive linemen. Stay tuned for that breakdown next week. We're going to talk about it. Again, we're going to try to get him on, but either way, we're going to break him down. Full episode on James Cook, and the season he had was a great one. And again, it falls right in line with some of those league trends stuff that, when we're talking the extra offensive lineman. Anthony, awesome show. I love this new format. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And, maybe you weren't able to watch it live on YouTube, but get to Spotify, get to Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, get back and, listen to the rest of the episode. Tell your friends about it. This is huge. Again, we're trying to grow and expand, and, every little comment or share when it comes to the audio side of things. We love YouTube. We love doing the film and everything and breaking plays down. But again, we want to open up our content to another side of the house when we're talking podcasts. So please tell anyone and everyone about it, that they can download our podcast now. And it is very much more podcast friendly.
Yes, absolutely. We are trying to be more adapting for all of our fans and all of our consumers in a multitude of forms and fashions. And again, your feedback is tremendously, tremendously encouraged and welcomed. So if this new format is awesome for you, visually, audio side, whatever have you, if you have things you would like to see, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, get at us in the YouTube comments, get at us on Twitter. Erik can be found at Joe with the Dawuane clone line. That was great. That was awesome. Great. Get at Erik. He's at the Cover One handle. So at Cover the number 1. You can also his personal Erik J Turner. I'm at pro__ant. Get at us. Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, whatever you got. Again, we sincerely value any and every piece of feedback, as we do any and every piece of support. All you folks who tuned in live, thank you so much. All of you who will be watching later, thank you so much. The audio listeners, thank you very much. On that audio side, like Erik said, rate, review, subscribe to the show here on YouTube. Turn on notifications, subscribe to the Cover One channel as a whole on YouTube, and on the audio sides as well. Multitude of shows on the brand. Offseason is a very, very busy time across the brand. Multitude of different contents, avenues, analysis pieces, whatever you're looking for. We have your poison for you here at Cover One. And yeah, thank you to all you folks for any and every ounce of support that you give us. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. Again, Carl, thank you very much for your super chat. Thank you to all you folks for being here. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about the show, about the brand, about the channel. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, get at us in the comments on YouTube. Find us on social. We appreciate you folks. Erik, anything else before we say our final goodbyes?
No, thanks, guys. We appreciate you joining us live. And like Anthony said, if you didn't finish it, you weren't able to watch it live all together, get to the audio format on your drive in to work tomorrow morning. We appreciate all the support.
Yes, we hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. We will see you next week for another episode of the Cover One Film Room. But until then, I'm Anthony Prohaska. That's Erik Turner. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.